Good morning. It is Friday once again, which means we are back at it with Kingdom on the Road. And y'all, now's the point where I feel like somewhere baked into all of this, there's a Jesus take the wheel joke to be had because my hands are off the steering wheel. Ant is in control this week. He is going to be the one that is monitoring the chats, moderating this shindig. But I figure I'll go ahead and get us off to a rip roaring start. So, we're covering the patriarchs, right? And this is one of those weird spots where, because we're covering the patriarchs, we're trying to figure out how fast, how slow, how this, how that, because some of this stuff, right? Some of these stories that we covered, like the first two sections that we covered, we cover in a more aerial view, and you can cover broad concepts, but with this, especially here, right? Especially with this week's section of scripture, for me anyway, in preparation for this, it really helped me to see that we're in a section of scripture where each one of these different stories that we have work together cohesively to provide an aerial view of the various aspects of how God interacts with man and the things that we can learn and all of that kind of stuff, but also a granular view, because in this section where we're talking about Jacob, right? We're in part 2 of talking about Jacob, and we are in a spot where, some of this came up last week, but the Bible is showing its integrity in really, really substantive ways right now. Because the thing to remember about the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is these are stories that were passed down, right? That's one of the things that I think, honestly, for as much as we go into the fine-tuned details and the how to reads and really demystifying this Old Testament, I think just that simple fact alone is more than enough meat on the bone to really change the way that some people view the Old Testament, that these are stories passed down from generation to generation. And so with a story like Jacob's, right, by no means are the generations that came before him perfect. By no means. But here, if the Bible's trying to put its best foot forward, right, and only give a glossy representation of humanity, then don't you think, especially with what we're going to read today, that the Bible would kind of let the stories may get changed to shine the best light on the people involved in the story? Before we even get going, Matt, you look like you already got something to say.
What? I don't remember. Oh, yeah. I mean, you implied the ant was Jesus, but then we moved on past that. So.
What did you learn from today's episode of Kingdom on the Road? Well, it's Jesus. Right. Anyway, we'll move on past that. I can see Ant's skin crawling. Anyway,
hide me.
Oh, foolishness. Anyway, so
you get me up this early, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, what's your excuse the rest of the day? But anyway, so this week we are kicking off about halfway through Genesis chapter 28. And we are picking up with kind of a weird scene, right? We went over last week the dream that Jacob had. It's referred to as Jacob's ladder, right? That's it. There's that word can have a lot of different meanings to a lot of different folks, but it's this but that's where the source of the phrase Jacob's ladder comes from, is from the Bible. And so from that dream, we have communication between God and Jacob. And so, and if you want to go ahead and pull up 28 when you're ready. Do you want me to go ahead and read 13 through 15, or do you want to go ahead and jump in now, Ant?
Yeah, you can. I guess you can still read.
All right. You want to scroll down for me?
Down there. Okay.
All right. Cool.
Still learning how to drive the bus. So.
Yep. All right. So we are in Genesis 28, and we're picking up in verse 13 for those of you guys that are following along. And as always, before we start reading and all of that, good morning, Epic. Glad to see people in the chat. Absolutely chime in, questions, comments, concerns, any of that sort of stuff. Y'all, we cannot begin to tell you how helpful it is to hear from you guys as we go through this stuff, because it gives us an idea of when to hit pause, when to hit the gas, all of those kinds of things, because we're doing this as a tool for you guys. And so that feedback is invaluable. So we are picking up, like I said, with verse 13. And behold, easy for me to say, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. Also, your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the east, or to the west and the east, to the north and the south. And in you and in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken. So, what do you guys make of, this is the first substantive opportunity that Jacob has had of direct interaction, right? He's known that God interacted with his grandfather, with his father. The lineage is there, right? So now we are seeing this this conversation and this interaction here, but through means of a dream. So what do you guys make of that? There's I feel like dreams are their own conversation in a lot of regards. Is there significance to God interacting through dreams, but also what is the significance of God engaging Jacob personally here when he got to this point by less than savory means, right? Less than ethical means. So what does this say about God? Matt, let's go ahead and jump off with you.
What happens just before this? Like, where are we?
You'll go ahead and scroll up it.
I'm just thinking context wise.
Yeah, that's a good spot to.
Let me go.
Okay, so he's left he's left home and he's on his way to Haran.
Mhm.
So I think there's that element too. So before this point, he's still been basically living in Isaac's camp, right? So from a covenant perspective, if you hold to that sort of thing, Jacob was still under God's covenant with Isaac. But now Jacob has left home because he is on his way to Haran to, start his own life. So he steps out. And then God reaches out to Jacob to make covenant with him because he's no longer, he's under the covenant with Isaac, but he's not, right. God is establishing a personal connection with Jacob because Jacob has left the home of his fathers. So that's what I see. So, he was under Isaac's blessing, under Isaac's covenant. Now he's left. So God wanted to reach out and establish that connection with Jacob. You're not just blessed because of Abraham and because of Isaac, but I am with you.
So what about the timing of the timing of this? Because we've talked about before about how this is something that last week, maybe the week before, we had discussed the means in which Jacob got to this point. So how does this reflect God that even though we see Jacob showing his humanity in spades getting to this point, that he is still stepping out and God is meeting him?
So, if Jacob was already God's child of promise, right? Here's the thing. God is going to do what God is going to do regardless of us getting in the way. So I think, Jacob was going to leave home and he was going to meet God either way. It's just, it's a much more interesting story because Jacob did all of this subterfuge and all of this deceit before we get here. And God still says, you know what? I decided in eternity past that I was going to covenant with you. So, gosh darn it, I'm going to covenant with you.
I just had a mental image of God being like, gee, Willikers, guys, we're going to go ahead and do this anyway.
Yeah.
All right, Ant, you're up.
Yeah. I agree, Matt. I think, when we think about this question, why is it significant that God interacts, with Jacob here, connecting him to the family lineage, even though the way he got here could be considered as not ethical, not the right
for
way.
Sure.
And so when we think about that, you say, well, God, what are you doing? And I think you hit it on the head that God is a covenant keeping God, that he keeps his word, that if he said that, Abraham's seed is going to be blessed, that Jacob was going to be chosen, that he doesn't change his mind when he sees Jacob do something that is less than savory, as Joe put it, as he sees.
Yeah.
And I think about, how that, foreshadows in the New Testament where, and I've been teaching on, God's love. And I think this connects to God's love, is that while we were yet sinners, Christ died to demonstrate his love for us. He didn't wait till we got everything together, then said, okay, now I can die for you. and we can be connected. No, he says, even though you're in sin, I'm dying for you, and I'm showing you that my love is for you no matter what. Amen. I had to put that up there.
Phenomenal. The answer is he's a bum and didn't show up today. I don't know.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The gospel is not, let's get our face washed, let's tuck our shirt in,
Right.
and then
There you go.
and then maybe God will be nice enough to forgive us if I wear a tie today. No, that's not.
Yeah. So keep this thing rolling. You know, I guess I'll pick it up for you, Joe, and keep this thing rolling.
Mhm.
In this, do we really see God's interaction with faulty humanity? I mean, Jacob is a real person, right? We see him as, you know, no different. You know, he didn't, you know, even though he saw a ladder going into heaven, you know, which everybody doesn't get to do that. But this individual himself is flawed just like any one of us. What does that say to us when it relates to having a relationship with God? Because I think so, back to that point, some people think that we have to be perfect, we have to do everything right to have this relationship with God. But Jacob here shows us that a real human being with real flaws has a relationship with God.
Mhm.
And I'll pick on Joe. Joe, what is that? What is that? You know, what images did that conjure up for you? Seeing this relationship with all of Jacob's flaws, he is still favored by God here.
So I've said before, and I'll say again, one of my favorite, and quite possibly my favorite hymn of all time is "Amazing Grace," because there's just there's so that's so resonant to me. Um, and when I go back and I read through these stories in the Old Testament, now with the ability to be able to pull the lens out and adjust the lens along the way and continue to mess with it to come into focus depending on where I'm at and all of that kind of stuff, and the active participation it takes to engage with the Old Testament, I am given this renewed sense of being a part of something larger. And that to me was even more like that's a true statement for me normally, but in prep for this and going back and reading this section of Genesis, I was like, man, I really hope that we camp here for a second, because I really think that even though there's value in the context and the cultural context and understanding how this affected Jacob and all of that kind of stuff, if we understand the cultural context of it, then that automatically turns the light to us in a modern context, because God is the same now, then, and forever. And so we then can gain a perspective on what God is willing to do when interacting with flawed humanity, because it doesn't require us to be perfect. It is grace that makes no sense. It is mercy that makes no sense. And it's a willingness to participate with a flawed creation that is just it's mind-blowing. In certain ways, it makes me want to, write books upon books about it, but at the same token, it's so astonishing that there's almost not words.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Matt, dealing with this flawed humanity, when you see God interacting with Jacob, what does this say to you? How does this affect you?
Well, the only way that any of this works is verse 15. He says, "Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you."
Yeah.
We're gonna drop the ball
Yeah, there you go.
daily, multiple times for some of us. But God is with us, and God keeps us, because we've talked about before on this stream that the active participant in God's promises is God.
Yeah.
God says, "I'm going to do a thing, and you are mine." So he's the mover in that. If God says you're his, you're his. And I know we've had those conversations before. I'm not, we're not getting into the depth of that, but it is in the text. God says to Jacob, "I will keep you."
Yeah.
This is my doing. This is what I'm going to do, and you can't screw it up. So there. No.
Yeah, no. Yeah, even when we try, and sometimes it's not for lack of trying to screw it up.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what we don't understand is that God knows the end at the beginning.
Yeah.
That's the way Isaiah says it, is that he's the Lord that knows the end at the beginning. He's Alpha and Omega. He's the first and the last. He's the one who is, who was, and is to come. So there's nothing outside of his knowledge, and so he's calculated for all this. He's made room in his plan for us to be human beings. Isn't that crazy? You know, uh, so I love both of you guys' answer on that, because I think it's reassuring.
Yeah.
Because even in a modern day sense, people are trying to get it right. That's all we're ever trying to do. We want to get it right. But sometimes we're going to get it wrong. Sometimes we're going to make choices that are not the right choice. But somehow God, like a GPS, recalculates and says, "Okay, we'll get you. I can get you on the right path if you just listen to me along the way." Did y'all want to add anything to that before we move forward to the end of this dream?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So I want to put the focus though back on the text, because yes and amen to everything that applies to us even today, because we can understand the unchanging nature of God and all of those kinds of things. But this is where we need to acknowledge the duality of comprehending something like the Old Testament, and specifically the patriarchs, because this isn't just true for the patriarchs, but it's certainly true for these foundational texts for the covenant and understanding how God interacted and all of those kinds of things. That even though it's flawed and it's messy and it's complicated and all of that, this is where it becomes powerful to look at the story in larger swaths, right? Because on one hand, you have this example specifically right here of a flawed human and all of that. But also, I think sometimes we fall into the trap to go to the thesis statement of this section of what we're trying to do, how to read the patriarchs, how to engage with this stuff. I think sometimes we fall into the trap of over isolating specific aspects and stories of the Old Testament to the point where we divorce it from the larger pieces at play. And when we take larger chunks of this and see, well, wait a minute, okay, let's track here, right? God made a promise to Abraham. God continued that promise through his son Isaac. Okay, God, even though humans muddied the waters, as humans are ones to do, and all of that, God's continuing his promise here. And right now, that might seem like, okay, we're walking along the path, no real big deal, no real big problems. This is kind of relatable, all of that kind of stuff. But building those foundational reps of God will continue to work through humanity and all of that, guys, those are the foundational pieces that become very, very important the further that you get into the Old Testament, because the further that you get into the Old Testament, the much more complicated it gets. We haven't even gotten to the heaviest portions.
Well, I think just to stick with that, I think for me, it emphasizes God's covenant keeping, relationship, that if he said it, he's bound to it. He said he puts his word above his name. I think I was reading last week in Isaiah 55, he says that that just as sure as the rain comes down and the snow comes down to water the earth and it shows forth its bud and it bears fruit, so shall my word, which comes from my mouth, go and accomplish everything I said that it would do, and it would not return to me void. And so God is, to steal a phrase, a man of his word.
Yeah.
If he said it, Jacob, you can, and I feel like it's hard not to connect that to salvation. It's just hard not going there, that this is the God that we're trusting. That if he said that I confess Jesus as Lord, that I'm saved, it's his word that I'm counting on, not my goodness, not my, ability to do all the right things. Not that means I'll just do whatever I want, right? But at the same time, it just seems like we can just trust God's word, and we see it even here in the beginning, the Bereshit, the book of beginnings right here, the Genesis. He shows us that, look at how I interact with the forefathers, the patriarchs, that I keep my word even when Abraham lies and Isaac deceives and Jacob deceives. Even when these things happen, my word is not going to return to me void. It's going to accomplish everything that I said it would do. And so I think I'm agreeing with you. I'm just taking a different nuance, on that same topic. And so, I think it's powerful.
Yeah.
So No, it's both for sure, because as Christians, as people who have the Holy Spirit, but also live post cross, right? We have the lens of the gospel when we read these things, and really we see, the author of the book of Hebrews lays out pretty nicely for us that the Old Testament was just the gospel veiled. So so there's
Paul says that clearly, that there was a veil over their eyes.
Right.
So absolutely.
But to Joe's point, there is also a less big context within the story itself, where these things are relevant specifically to this narrative, not just the meta narrative.
Right. And that's something that is really on display with this next section that we're heading into, where you can see, like, it's this push pull tension on display, where God is calling forward, and Jacob's like, oh, okay, I think I got this, and goes forward a little bit, and then really doesn't have it and stumbles, and then goes back, and you see more of his humanity, and then you see
Right.
God like, okay, come on, and it's like, okay, come on, and it's this cosmic dance on display that's happening, that, like, I read this, and yeah, you know what, I read this in the sense of so many, years later, in a completely different world, in a completely different context, and all of these things. But when you understand that there are through lines to humanity, and that humans have been doing the same thing on repeat over and over again, on the same nonsense over and over again, that there is still a need for that patience and that grace and that mercy for us to do that cosmic dance with God, some of us more than others. So I guess for me, not to make it too myopic, I see the power of this story on display, where I do see that wide angle view, that continued through the generations view, and that gives me hope for generational concepts, and continued faith, and all of those kinds of things, but also to the individual life as well.
So, but before we move on, let me drop into the world of the text here, and really just get you talked about the continuation of Abraham's covenant, but I want to give us, like, it's in the text view, but it's also a more long term also. So if we start from Genesis 3, that's God's first promise. He said, right, and like you said, Joe, when we started this thing, right, these are the stories. These are the stories that were passed down orally before they eventually finally got written down. Right? So they all knew the story up to this point. It was their lineage to pass these things down, right? So Genesis 3, God says, your offspring will crush his head. Now, obviously, we know, because we're post-cross, we know the ending. We know that's Jesus. But let's stay in the story, right? So then Seth comes. Is he the promised one? Is he gonna, right? Nope. So he goes on. The line of Seth takes us down through Enoch and some others, right, to Noah. Now, Noah, again, we talked about this veiled gospel thing. So he was a messianic type. He did save humanity from God's judgment, but he's still not the one, right? He didn't crush the serpent. So let me go from Noah to Abraham. God promises Abraham, you'll be a father of many nations, right? He has Ishmael. He has Isaac. Isaac is the child of promise. Okay, so Abraham is thinking, okay, is he the one that's going to do the thing? So because these stories are passed down, so every time they have a child, they're asking themselves, okay, is this the promised one? They've been asking this question since Adam and Eve, right? So then Jacob comes, and that's where we're at in the covenant currently. God just covenanted with Jacob as he leaves the cover of his covenant with Isaac and moves out on his own. So we're going to continue to see, is this the one? Throughout the Old Testament, as the story unfolds, that's the background question. Every generation. Okay, is this the one? I just wanted to add that background.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's great to kind of lead up to this particular point. It kind of sets the stage for this dream ending, Jacob waking up, confessing that surely the Lord is in this place, and him beginning to say, wait a minute, now it's my time to connect in this relationship with God, that he's been the God of my father. Now he's my God. And I think this is where this connection happens, and this dream ends, and Jacob seems to make a bargain or a deal with God here. I've taught on this, so I'm gonna kind of let you guys jump in on this language here in this particular passage. Let me see. Let's see. I'm gonna start at verse 18. It's really small on my screen. I'm gonna have to pull it up. Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had at his head and set it up as a pillar, poured oil on it, on the top of it, and he called the name of the place Bethel. But the name of that city had been Luz previously. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I may come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be the house, God's house. And all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. And so here's the, some would say a bargain, a covenant, a vow, an agreement. What do you guys make of this? And we'll start with Joe. What do you make of this whole conversation here?
So this to me reads skeptical, right? This to me reads like an if then statement, and like a very natural human reaction in certain regards. Like if this is true, then this, rather than taking it in trust, having it like continuing to read yourself into the conditional statements of the situation. And so like you see not just how Jacob responds, but how Jacob acts going forward. Like he is taking that measure of responsibility on himself,
right,
to make
he's
sure
still
that
he's still
everything. Good.
I was gonna say he's still very much taking ownership of God's promise instead of letting God be the promise keeper.
Right. I almost I almost wonder if like there's and this is I've said this before. I think the Bible in certain regards allows for a healthy dose of speculation, and this is firmly in that camp of speculation, when you're trying to think through the motives of the individual. But I almost wonder if this is a continuation from that same kind of mindset of, I need to take this for myself. It is my responsibility. That, like, kind of taking the bull by the horns in certain regards that we've seen already on display and brought about through those less than savory means. That it's that same continued mindset of, well, it's my responsibility to continue on this promise now that this is on my shoulders, sort of thing.
So there's that aspect, but also I think, and this is something all three of us are going to resonate with, right? Because here, right, God had said, "I am with you, and I will keep you," right? But like up to this point, Jacob's life has been defined by his struggle, the fight, right, to get to where he is. And now God is saying, you know what? I'm going to keep you. Jacob doesn't have a place in his mind to receive that because he only knows how to fight. So I think there's an identity and a psychology piece here too. Jacob doesn't know how to not have that conflict. Because you hit that point in your life where, like, maybe it's only a day or two, or maybe it's a season, but things are right for a minute, right? I don't know what to do with myself when that happens. Because I'm so used to fighting and grinding and like all the things that suddenly when I don't have to, it's like, who am I? Because we become so identified with the struggle. So I don't know if, again, this is all speculation, but I don't know if that's a piece of the puzzle here for Jacob too.
Yeah, I think those are those are valid takes. But I would say that you kind of stay with the culture here. This language sounds like it fits the culture. It is covenant language. I think Joe was pointing that out.
Yep.
If you will, then I will. That actually happens throughout the Old Testament. Right. Like the entire Old Testament is built off of this language. Even Deuteronomy chapter 28. If you obey the voice of the Lord, right, and do all that I command you, then this will happen. And he lists all the blessings and then all the cursings. If you do not obey the voice of the Lord, then this is what will happen. So this is that covenant language here that Jacob is not making not striking a bargain with God, but making a pact with him that we are now covenant. We are now together in this. So my fate is tied to your goodness. Whatever happens to me will show who God really is. Right. So he's basically because later on, and it's interesting. I don't know if hopefully we don't want to dive into that because that's a whole nother string. The whole piece, right? Later on in Malachi, God says the same thing to the Israelites. He says to them, he says, try me in this and see, won't I do this? If you would give me that 10th, I will bless your people. Well, it seems like Jacob, it was the first person to even have that language of, I'm going to try God. I'm going to test him in this. I'm going to tie my fate to his goodness. If he's the God of my fathers and forefathers, and he says he's going to be with me, then I'm going to go ahead and we're going to see, and I think that can be taken one of two ways, right? It could be taken as genuine, right? Or it could be taken as more of the same of what we've gotten from Jacob. And I think that's what Joe was pointing out, is that is he Is he running another scam? Is he, you know, is he trying something, or is this genuine, especially after what he's just experienced? You know, where
Right.
he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place," and I didn't know it. So it's almost like, is this the moment where something in Jacob is beginning to change, or is it the same old Jacob? So I'm glad, you know, Joe brought that nuance out, because it's something that I wouldn't have thought about, right? I wouldn't have seen it from that side. So I like that he brought that out, because it asks that question, it begs that question. Is this Jacob just doing another, you know, running another game, or has he begun to change? Is he turning into the true patriarch and father that will be of many nations, the Israelite nation? So very interesting takes on this. I like our different personalities as we look at this.
And that's one of the things that I hope for to turn the perspective a little bit and look down the barrel of the camera to the audience for a second. You know, I really hope that with what you guys just saw, in the fact that some of what was said, like Matt said some things that got me being like, that's interesting,
Right.
because I've never looked at that angle before. You know, and Ann said some things, and there was back and forth in the realm of speculation a bit, while still concreted to the the culture, the text, proper execution on the text, and all of those kinds of things. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to push against the walls of the text a bit, in an effort to more fully understand what's going on here, because I think sometimes it can be intimidating to do that with scripture, especially with Old Testament, because there is so much that goes into the cultural piece of this, because it was so long ago, and it was an entirely different society, an entirely different time, without the same level of historical record keeping that even the New Testament has. We can look back to the New Testament with a measure of cultural context and confidence in that, just by sheer volume of how things were documented and all of that kind of stuff. And so with something like this is prime opportunity to be able to say, okay, this is there's some things where, like, hey, what about this? What about that? As long as you understand that the questions that you're asking aren't they're speculation for a reason. You're not going to find a chapter verse for what it is that you're saying. And as long as you don't try to do gymnastics to find it,
Right.
cool, go for it. Like, ask questions. That's what leads to healthy to a healthy relationship with the text.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because, like I said, you know, and I reiterate, you know, these are all our takes on it, but what we should be doing is taking, you know, the Bible at its word. This is what it is. Anything else, like you said, the Bible is silent on. So, you know, we're kind of just using our spiritual imagination, you know,
Yeah.
you know, to have a conversation here, but to keep this thing moving, that covenant that he makes with God, because that you know that and that word Bethel actually means house of God, right? Bethel, that's literally
Beth El.
Bethel, right? You know, house of God. Uh, he basically is saying, you know what? I'm gonna make this place sacred. This is going to be a pivotal bus stop in my journey. This is a milestone in my journey, and I want to make sure that it's understood and it's known what this is, because I think at the end of the day, as Jacob is going about, because he's kind of nomadic, and so a lot of his journey is about moving and going from this place to that place. I mean, he was sleeping on a rock. I mean, come on, he's basically, homeless and nomadic, and he's moving around and he's doing all these things. But his entire existence is built off of this journeying from one place to another. And when we get to chapter 29, he begins to focus in on building a family, looking to, because I think the word that was given to him, either from his father or his mother, is to go to the land of Laban, which is one of their relatives, and find a wife, right? And so that's what we find in chapter 29, where Jacob ends up meeting Rachel. And so I'm going to kick it over to Brother Matthew to kind of give us a little bit of a summary or overview of what's going on here. What is Jacob doing?
So in short, right? Laban is Jacob's cousin. He is Jacob's uncle, and he's about to be Jacob's father-in-law twice over.
Okay.
So
digest that.
Right. Right. But okay. So where'd it go? Right. So Jacob goes to Laban. So post flood, right? We got Noah. So if we go back to Shem, there's a few generations, and we get to Terah. Now, Terah was the father of Abraham, right? We already know that guy. We went through his story, and then so Nahor and Harlan were Abraham's brothers. Harlan was the father of Lot. We've heard about that guy. But Nahor, he was the father of Bethuel, who's the father of Laban, right? So really, these are all people of promise through Shem, right? They're all Semites. As opposed to the Canaanites or the descendants of Canaan, the descendants of Ham, right? That were cursed, that are all around them in the lands surrounding this, right? So Isaac sends Jacob to Padan Aram, where the Shemites live, to keep it in the family and not bring in any cursed blood.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if you really,
because we're dealing with blessings, dealing with blessings, and we're dealing with curses here as well.
Yeah, and so
because the Canaanites, as descendants of Ham, are under Ham's curse.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting in the ancient world, how that thought process was. Like you said, this is about blessings and it's about cursed. It's about trying to stay away from intermingling with these people and that people. And so that was their reason for staying within their family, is because they're staying within what they believe is the covenant, is the agreement, is that this family is blessed. Now,
through Shem,
right,
we get Abraham and all of the rest of them. So they've got to keep within what we now call the Semites, right? Right. They've got to keep it Semitic.
And so real quick, Ant, before you roll forward, I wanted to look at what Matt just said from a different angle, because I'm so glad that we have somebody who can articulate that well on the show, because for me, looking at that, I just being honest, it helped me to look at there are tons of spots where you can find them on the internet, but people have created like actual charts to like a visual representation to be able to see, okay, so this is where we're heading, this is this is the bloodline, this is the group, all of that kind of stuff, because for me, that helped. But it's when you unpack the methodology of what they're doing and the reasoning behind what they're doing, it's this fascinating amalgamation between a spiritual take, like the spiritual aspects being closer to the surface than I think we really understand in the modern West, coupled with that covenant. If you do, like, I'm playing, like, we have to play by the rules. We have to follow the contract, if you will, to use modern language. You know what I mean? In order for this to work out. And it's this weird combination of the two that you start to see in these ancient peoples, when you can look at, okay, so here's the line, here are the people. Oh, wait, this goes back to this person that, yeah, I heard about that guy. Yeah, we read about that guy, which I love the way that you describe it, because you sound like you're telling a story about the guy down the street in New York. Like, listen, this guy over here.
Right. And that guy.
Yeah.
We've talked about these people. We know who they are.
Yeah, exactly. And if you haven't, you can find the entire backlog of Kingdom on the Road over on the YouTube channel.
Right. So this whole deal with Jacob and Rachel seems to start out as kind of a like a romance novel. it's like in the middle of the biblical text, there is this, I don't know, Cinderella, kind of moment. And lo, she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen.
Right.
No, seriously, it kind of reads that way as you're reading through it. And I don't know if we want to actually read it, or we want to summarize it, or how we want to do it. But at this particular point, Jacob just falls head over heels for Rachel. I mean, so much so that there's kiss, there's tears, there's there's all kinds of things happening here. Why do you guys think that this is necessary to be in this passage? Why is that necessary in the passage?
So so part of it is we're seeing here again, right? Like, as the story unfolds, people who aren't familiar with the story, basically Jacob works for his uncle, cousin, father-in-law for 7 years, right, for the bride price, and gets given Leah, who is the older, right, because that's the culture. And then he's willing to work another 7 years for Rachel, who was beautiful. What we're seeing here again, right? So Jacob, now obviously Jacob and Esau were twins, but still Jacob was the younger.
Right.
And Rachel is the younger. And Isaac, right? Isaac was the younger. So again, we're seeing the narrative of God, like, breaking their cultural paradigm, and instead of going through the eldest, going through the youngest.
Yeah.
Now, let me, if you don't mind, let me contrast that take very, like, yes, this is another example of that theme and that through line being evident here. Let me talk to you about a different perspective here. So there's when in telling a story, there's this concept in movies and in books called a meet cute. It's this idea of when the love interests meet for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this to me reads like a weird meet cute between these two.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go back to this idea of these are stories.
Mm-hmm. They are.
These are stories that were passed down. And we're going to unpack, Matt touched on the tip of the iceberg as far as the sheer mammoth amount of drama that we're like, this puts days of our lives to shame with what we're going to read here. And
Right.
so, but in order to get there, in order to understand the people at play, to understand this unfolding story of Jacob, who by the time that these stories are being told across these generations, this is Israel, this is Jacob, this is one of the patriarchs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And thus through the conversation, this is Rachel. And so this is the origin story of their relationship. And I think sometimes some of that language can make some folks uncomfortable along the way, because like if this is a story being told, then what does that mean about how much authority we could give it, or how accurate it is, or there's a million different rabbit trails and rabbit holes that you can go down and all that kind of stuff. But if you can accept that this is another example of the Bible pulling you in and drawing you in to follow into a story, to read the unfolding narrative that is at play here, then what we are seeing is the origin of a love story, albeit the start of a very complicated family dynamic.
Right.
That leads to huge aspects of the story. Like we are going to see the origins here of very key pieces, but this might be I'll be the first one to admit I'm a storyteller. Put me in front of a mic, I will tell you a story. I am drawn in by somebody telling me a story. I really think that that's some of what is so special about certain aspects of the Bible, that is ultimately the vehicle that allows you to travel with the things like accuracy and theology and right understanding and cultural context and all of that kind of stuff. Sure, that's aspects of it, but the Bible is so good at telling a story. And that's part of what I think we get here. And I'm reading this thing, right? And this is the first time that I've read it since being introduced to the Strongs. I'll just be honest with you guys. I didn't utilize the Strongs when I used other tools the first time that I did the Whole Truth. So this time I was like, oh, okay, I've got the Strongs. And so I wanted to look up to see if like what I'm reading here is like what I'm reading here. You know what I mean? Like so he shows up and he shows out, right? He's just like, he's like trying to impress, and he kisses her and then he starts weeping. And I'm like, is this actually what I'm reading? Yeah, no, legit. It means to weep bitterly or to sob in the Strongs. And so I understand what it's trying to convey. It's just a fascinating picture behind all of this narrative that's happening at play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, verse 11 in chapter 29. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept.
Yeah.
And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. And so this, like you said,
Kissing cousins.
like what? Oh man,
I'm sorry.
this
So what else did
moment-
you learn from today's episode of Kingdom
Right,
on the Road?
right,
That
right,
Jacob
right.
and Rachel were kissing
Right.
cousins.
Kissing cousins, right? This moment, why again? And so I'm gonna reiterate my question. I'm gonna change it a little bit. Why focus in on this weeping and sobbing bitterly at this kiss? You know, what is this trying to convey? Why even put this in here? Why not? Because and I like something that Joe had reiterated earlier that we've been saying week after week is that the Bible is integral. It doesn't hide, you know, the nuances of the humanity of these people that we're dealing with. You know, so what is happening here that he would kiss Rachel and then lift up his voice? So this means this man like shrieked. He cried out and then says, I'm your relative, you know, I'm from Rebecca's my mom, and then she
I'm
takes
here to
off.
find a wife, baby.
You know what's going on here? Why is this here? And then how has this impacted modern readers when it comes down to finding a wife or finding a mate or the whole idea of, because this story has impacted people's relationships. You know, a lot of people use this story to teach on marriage. I don't think this is a good story to teach on marriage, but the people use this story to teach on marriage. I mean, I guess there's some principles in there, but why is this so significant?
So, you know, up to this point, right? We've seen Jacob the deceiver, Jacob the trickster. Like, Jacob is just straight up he's a hard man. He's a ruffian, right? But he is so moved by kissing Rachel that we see this tough guy break into tears.
Yeah, I think it's.
And I think that's the significance, is we're beginning to see the character change, but through right, it is grace through the love of a woman.
So I'm right there with you, Matt. When I read this and I read about that emphasis on an exclamation of emotion to the point where the man can't hold himself back of showing emotion. I'm going to take a page out of your book and say, and I don't mean this like you don't need to find it, Ant, but what happened before this? What led to this moment? And when you are tracking along with the story, you're starting to see these micro changes in Jacob. Dare I go too far in saying, with what we have in context of a personality assessment of Jacob, he's not the type of man that's going to change like the flip of a switch, like night and day. Like suddenly everything is completely different and he's this completely different dude. Like Matt said, we have these accounts that suggest that Jacob is a hard man. And so he is visited by God. He is going off to follow instruction on finding a wife, and he finds this woman that he falls head over heels for. And it's this continued change in personality, in perspective, in experience that's lent to a shift for him in his very being that we're going to continue to see evidenced along the way, used both directly. The aspects of this are pushed forward directly by God, and also changed by people and circumstance as well.
Mhm.
And I think that along with being that origin story piece, I do think that Matt's onto something, that this fits into the larger narrative of the progressive change of Jacob along the way.
Yeah, and I like that you said that because it makes me actually, as we've been flying, at 30,000 feet, it makes me want to drop down just a little bit, to look at Laban's reaction to the news that Jacob is there. Picking up at verse 19, then it came to pass that when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and he embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, listen to what Laban says, surely you are bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. What do you guys think about that phrasing? That surely you are my bone and my flesh. Because we've heard that before. Um, what is he saying here, and why is that phrasing and it's quote and it's quoted here? And I think it's quoted in the original statement. Actually, probably every time you see it, it's got quotations around it. What is it about this phrasing that is important here?
Well, it's a quote. It's a quote back to the creation narrative, right? Adam beheld Eve and
Mhm.
said, "Surely you are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." So we're going all the way back to the beginning here. Anytime we see this quoted, which is more proof. Laban, being part of the family, like he knew the stories too.
Do the stories too. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Joe, you want to chime in on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt hit the nail directly on the head, that with the Bible being a hyperlinked text, we don't need to go from the New Testament back into the Old Testament in order to see that. We can see that right here, just 20 some chapters, and I say that tongue in cheek, the 20 some chapters thing,
Right,
because
right.
that's
Chapters,
inconsequential.
right. Yeah.
But even just within this book, in this time period.
Yeah. Yeah. I love those type of small connections that when you're carefully reading through something, because I'd never caught that before, and I've read through this, but us reading through this and kind of walking through, because I was going to fly over it, right? We're just going to fly over it, and it kind of caught my attention. Like, wow, there's another connection back to the original, or back to the beginning. And like Matt was talking about earlier, this thing began with Adam and Eve, and it is continuing forward. So there's the connection here. You have the Adamic covenant and the Abrahamic covenant are interconnected, because it's still going towards the same goal. And so I thought I would pause there and just look at that
Yep.
nuance.
They're all trying to get to the one that God promised Eve. It's
Yeah.
just this slow crawl, continuation, expansion, right? Because God builds on his covenant.
Right. And I think it's powerful in those moments where you see those hyperlinks and you see those nods, like uh like Matt said, it stands to reason that if if he is quoting the story, then what? That means he knows the story. And I think sometimes, because of everything, because of the way that we read the Bible in the West, and really because the way that the Bible is structured, sometimes we view the Bible as a single camera show. right? What else, like what's happening is what's in front of the camera. But this shows that even though we are following a very specific set of characters and a very specific group, that these stories are being passed outside of just what's happening on the page, that there are larger things at play happening. And I wanted to just take a look real quick while you were asking that question. I'm like, I wonder if that's something that gets pulled out in a lot of, like, if you look up commentaries, there's a couple of them that pretty much, if you Google, such and such a verse explained, you're going to hit the same 3, maybe 4 commentaries pretty universally. And all of them pretty much just state this as an acknowledgement that they would have known that Rebecca married a wealthy and distant relative of the family. So it's that, yeah, this is an acknowledgement of family and all of that kind of stuff. But yes, however, also dare to push a little bit deeper, because you can pull some really great stuff out.
Right, because Jacob, right, he goes off to find a wife or whatever, and then what he finds, right, is his cousin uncle. he knows the stories, right? His wife, or wives, as the case may be, are part of the promise. They are part of God's established peoples. Like you said, Joe, there's other, like, it's not just the patriarchs. Sure, that's the primary line where we get Jesus and all that stuff eventually, but there are other players around that are part of this covenant story. And we don't get to see, like, all of the extra stuff, because it is, as you said, for the most part, a single lens story.
And that's why I'm glad that we're taking the time to, we hadn't through at the very beginning, but we've started pulling in, even to the extent of the wives and the ancillary characters around the patriarchs. Even that is a small scale version of what it is that we're talking about, that it's more than just the patriarchs. There are other people involved, and that concept is blown up as we start to look at the extended family and different things like that.
Yeah, so let's pick it up here, because I think we want to dive into the significance of this meeting, because there's some tricky stuff that happens here. And so in verse 15, then Laban says to Jacob, "Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wage be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, and Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Oh. Now Jacob loved Rachel and said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Let's pause there. What is this about? What is the significance of serving his cousin uncle?
You see what you do, Matt? You see the things that you started.
I am well aware of the influence that I wield.
Go ahead, Matt, dive in there. The serving the cousin uncle for 7 years.
So Uncle Laban.
Nonsense. Love it.
So because you are my relative, should you serve me for nothing? So obviously there had been some discussion prior about, hey, you know, I inherited a whole lot of nothing from my dad. Can I come work for you? Because you're family and you know the story and you're part of the promise. I'm not working for those people. And then sure. So we see the continuation of the off-screen conversation. Sure. But because you're my relative, should you serve me for nothing? Right. We're told there's two daughters. The older is Leah, of the younger Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate. A lot of translations here say her eyes were weak, which just means that she was not attractive. But Rachel, she was hot. She was beautiful in form and appearance. And Jacob loved her. And so I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter, right? So we are seeing the emphasis here in the storytelling on God again, using the younger before the older, right? The second over the first, because the first shall be last and the last shall be first.
Interesting. I see the wheels turning, Joe. What you got?
So I guess, and maybe this is the biasness of me being a business owner and me seeing those aspects of it, but it almost seems like to me,
Yeah, bring that.
You know, it feels like Laban is playing the long game. Like he's already well aware and already like opportunistic, I guess is a word that comes to mind when I read this. Like he's thinking several steps ahead and recognizing what's happening here. And like, you know, I get the picture of, you know, you go with your hat in your hand to somebody and say, hey, you know, can I come work for you? Oh, sure. No problem. What do you think? You know, and it's this inviting nature of family, sure, but far from no strings attached. Like this seems very pregnant with a lot of subtext that there were things happening behind the scenes that Jacob was walking straight into.
Oh, yeah. Laban marked him for sure, which is interesting. I think that's more that I think that's another piece to the story here too, because up to this point, Jacob's been the con man.
Yeah.
He's been the deceiver, he's been the trickster. Apparently, it's a family trait.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up, Joe, is that Jacob is so enthralled by Rachel that he never sees this coming. He never saw this coming. Verse 19, Laban said, it's better to give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of his love, the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My days are fulfilled that I may go in to her. Wow. right there in the text. Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her, and Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. And so it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah, and he said to Laban, "What is this that you have done to me? What is it? Not for Rachel that I served you? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? Why have you deceived me?" This is, yeah, we're getting into soap opera range here.
Oh yeah. Before we even get to the other stuff, like we're already way into the soap opera realm. So two things that I want to that I want to pull out from this portion. One thing that off air you two have both have heard me say in spades, but I've said it on the air as well. Every single person, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how long in the tooth you are, doesn't matter how long you've been a Christian, doesn't matter. Everybody's got a blind spot.
Mm.
That is human nature. Everybody's got a blind spot. And con men or people who are streetwise they tend to be people that fall the hardest when they do fall because they don't think that they've got a blind spot. And so we see here this simultaneous story happening, these 2 points happening parallel.
Mhm.
Jacob falls for his blind spot and walks right into this situation, but also is then put in the midst of all of this, put into the situation where he is now a servant. He is a hired hand
Mhm.
working for somebody else.
Uncle Laban.
Yeah. And so I'm curious for you guys if you guys see significance here. If this is just a matter of, do you guys read this as this is Jacob demonstrating his love and just doing what he needs to do to go through it? Or is there something deeper there about Jacob being put in this role of serving somebody else, all while being deceived?
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, right? God promised Jacob, right? I got you. I'll keep you. What God doesn't say, right? This is something we've all learned along the way, is that God will humble you if you need humbled. God will, God has a way of using those around you and in the situations to, whether you want to or not, make him more like he wants you to be. And I definitely see. I don't think it is lost on Jacob at this point that, oh wait, how the turntables. No, how the tables have turned.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of view this as Jacob goes through this, he's meeting with some of the things. I hate to say, you reap what you sow, in a spot like this, but Jacob is seeing something from the perspective of maybe how his brother felt, and maybe he gets to see this, and that's what eventually humbles him. That it's not an intentional, oh, God's going to put him through this because of this. But
No.
if you live long enough, you end up seeing things like, wow, I did that. This is what that experience is like from the other side, because he was very frustrated, when he figured out what had happened. He said, "What have you done to me? Why did you deceive me? Why did you do this to me? You know what I was here for. You know what I work for. I gave you 7 years. That 7 years, it said it seemed very quick because of his love for her. But I guess in this moment, it all came back to him that it wasn't quick. It was 7 years that I just gave away of my life, and you deceived me." And so, I don't know if there's a bigger, broader significance to this that is more woven into the overall picture.
Right.
But I just looking at it, I wonder if he recognizes, because we're going to get to at some point him meeting up with his brother and how he felt about that. And I wonder if this plays a role locked into his mind, like, wow, is this what it felt like? To be
So there was
like that.
There was something you said, and this is part of why I asked these questions, because one of the things that I came across in prep for this is this idea that there is a prevailing thought that God put Jacob through this.
Yeah, I don't.
It's pure happenstance that you use the same exact turn of phrase that prevailing thought uses, but I know that you're using it differently.
Yeah.
So this isn't me turning around and using your words against you or anything like that. But they use this term, you reap what you sow, to try and say that, oh, Jacob did this. God's going to put Jacob through this.
Right.
So he can learn a lesson in humility and in what this feels like and all of that kind of stuff. And that, to me, I can appreciate that life lessons teach lessons. Right. Life events are the things that are the building blocks for learning lessons. We talked about this at a couple of different points. We just didn't say it exactly like that. I'm saying just in the last hour and a half, we have touched on that in several different points. That being said, though, there's still a bridge too far that we have to be careful not to cross, that we're not putting words in God's mouth.
Right.
That don't belong to him.
Right. And I agree. And I'm glad you said it that way, because that by no means, and me, as far as my theology, I do believe that God knows everything that's going to happen, and there are certain things that God's hand is directly on, right? But it doesn't rob people of their choices and their free will and their ability, to, make decisions that then when they look back on these decisions, they can say, man, that sucks. That man, if this is what that felt like, man, I need to tell my brother I'm sorry. And I'm adding to, this is not in the text, this is just me talking, but I mean,
it's very much implied in the narrative, though. I think later, as we do see his interaction with his brother, like he's scared for his life. He's like, my brother's gonna kill me.
Right. And if this is what he felt, then he's gonna kill me. This is horrible because I think about his reaction. I match this reaction with the original kiss, right? The kiss and the sobbing, and man, he's like, man, I've found something, I've accomplished something, this is great. And then 7 years later, after putting in all the work, to find out, wait a minute, that's not her. Why did you do this to me? Why did you do this to me? Why would you deceive me this way? I think this is just, important. And then Laban says, okay, because this happened, I'm gonna verse 20, 26. And Laban says, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Why didn't you say that in the beginning? Why did you agree to that? Why did you? But it goes back to what you said, Joe. He saw an opportunity. Yeah. I'm gonna get at least 7 years out of him. I may get 14. If he's got this guy pegged. He saw him as a mark. Like he wants Rachel so bad that I got him. So verse 27, fulfill her week, and I will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. Man, this is tragic almost. It's tragic almost. So with this happening, with this going on, Jacob, of course, because he wants Rachel, he submits to this. He doesn't run from this at all, right? And so he submits to this. Things go forward. Now he begins to have children, and there is a lot going on here with. So you have wives, and then you have handmaidens or maidens is what they're billed as. And so you've got the wife and her maiden. So both Leah and Rachel have a maid or maiden or whatever you want to call it. And all of these end up becoming Jacob's, I don't know what you call them. But the 12 are not from just 2 women.
Right.
They're actually from 4. And so I see Matt going through his information. You want to kind of put this together for us, set this scene for us?
Actually, I had a work thing come up, so I wasn't trying to anyway. So what are we doing? We're doing the 12, or are we skipping the whole thing where Jacob kind of gets him back?
Well,
by taking all his sheep.
Do we want to get into that?
Like, how much did Jacob really learn from all this?
So, if I'm not mistaken, and you guys can tell me if I am, I think that happened after this.
Yes, that's after that. Right here, we're going into him fulfilling the 7 years, the second 7 years.
Okay.
He fulfills the week. He fulfills that, and he gets Rachel. He loves Rachel more than Leah. He served Laban another 7 years, and now they begin to have children.
Yeah, I threw this together pretty late last night because I had a pretty busy day, and I actually didn't get into the 12. I didn't know how deep we were going to go with that. So
here,
but yeah, so we've got, ultimately, we've got Leah, and Rachel is made barren. We see here. But Rachel, same as what Sarah did, decides, okay, well, I'm going to have children by my servant.
Yeah.
And then Leah gets in on that too. And then so Jacob has more children by Leah's servant. And then we've got the whole Mandrake fiasco, whatever that is. I say, hey, here's this Mandrake. I'm gonna buy my husband from you. He will sleep with me tonight.
Man, this is just
Yeah.
whew.
So
So let me ask
anyway. So by the end of it, there's 12 kids by 4 women. And Joseph, which we'll get to probably next week, was finally born by Rachel. And so because let's add to the drama, right, and the family dysfunction. Because he loved Rachel more, he loved Joseph more.
There's that favorite, huh? You get that favorite. Let me ask this question. As we're kind of, starting to look towards bringing this in, again, we see the theme that is God at work in the midst of this mess? Why doesn't God make these people do right and then work? Why does he, work within the frailty and the faults of humanity?
Well,
go ahead.
It's like how do I put this? I know that I'm a little bit more this way than you guys are. As far as God's active role in everything and all that. I for one don't think there's anything that happens that God's not. I don't want to say responsible for. That's not what I mean. But no rogue molecule kind of thing. But at the same time, God prescribes the ends, but not the means.
Right. I got you.
People are still gonna people, right?
Yep.
We're not puppets where he's making us do each specific things, but God has a plan. There's an end. There's a way where God has said, okay, this is how this is gonna work out. But it's the means, right? It's the in-between bits where people get to people. And but God's not gonna let their mistakes foil his covenant, right? Because he has made all of these promises.
So if I could jump in before I have to bounce off,
Okay.
I would correct something that you said, Matt. We might use different language. We might emphasize different aspects, but I would go on a limb and I guess if I'm wrong, you can feel free to correct me, but you and I have been doing ministry together long enough that I really don't think I'm wrong, that we are all on the same page, that God is not surprised by our actions.
Right.
God is not caught unaware by the things that we do and all of that. So I would say that we are exactly on the same page as far as, and I like the way that you put it, Matt, that God prescribes the ends not the means
that
for the ends.
That's profound.
Now, again, you can take those and you can say, okay, I'm going to emphasize the God is in control portion of it, or I'm going to emphasize the fact that in the midst of all of that, people can make choices and people can choose what they're going to do. That doesn't mean that it surprises God, but people can make choices. It doesn't matter what aspect of it you emphasize. All of us will come into agreement on the fact that this is a yes and dynamic, and forever I will state, and that's kind of why I've backed out of that conversation, is if people are arguing that point from an either or perspective, then you're a dog chasing your own tail. You're not going to get anywhere as far as that conversation goes. So yes, and I'll say it in plain English for those keeping track at home. Yes, free will. Yes, God is not surprised and in control and all of that kind of stuff. But no, there's absolutely nothing that says that we're puppets. So that being said, though, in the midst of that, like having said all of that, laying that groundwork, one of the things that really I guess stood out to me is when you are reading through each aspect of the bearing of children, the unfolding story that's happening. Yes, these kids by these different women, and you can take these broad strokes and say, yeah, God is working in the messiness, because if God wasn't unwilling to work in the messiness, then nothing would happen.
Right.
Because humans are nothing but messiness. And so when you see what's happening here, and the fact that God will not be held down by man's stupidity and foolishness, that, well, wait a minute. There are different components at play here of God being reflected and characteristics of God being reflected as the story unfolds. Right from Jump Street, we see that Leah is not the favored one, that she is rejected by Jacob in all of this, that obviously Rachel is the preferred wife. And
to the point, like I said earlier, where Leah literally has to bargain for the love of her husband.
Yeah.
Right. And but we see God working in that, in showcasing love to the rejected. Love to the one that is less than. And so there's this powerful idea at play here that, we're not here reading about Immaculate Conception, guys. Like, you might want to put the kids to bed before you start reading this thing, because this is a whole lot of marital relations happening.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty plain English. What's going on? And
Jacob's a busy dude.
Jacob's a busy dude. And so
let's do that mandrake.
Nonsense. I love it.
Okay, I've been hanging out with you guys too long.
Matt, your nonsense is contagious.
Yeah.
But so if you read through, I guess, read between the lines here, Jacob doesn't necessarily love Leah. At least that's the impression that we get. I don't know as though we can say chapter and verse on that one, but I think if we're willing to read the story for what it is, I think that's kind of obvious. But he's still willing to have sex with her. Again, we're not reading about Immaculate Conception here.
And here's something interesting, is that Leah is the one that produces Judah.
Exactly. Right. Yes, that's exactly where I'm going. That you see the rejected producing some of the most significant players in the lineage, that like producing the lines that would be charted through straight through.
And then Judah, even like that's a whole nother study. You could even zoom in. You could even zoom in there because like he does some stuff, and yet Judah gets blessed to be the line of kings. Judah gets blessed to be the son whom through Christ's kingly lineage comes. But you know, but Judah did some stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's more pronounced in the Old Testament, this messiness that God will turn a mess into a masterpiece, right? He can take, it's like that artwork where you just start throwing paint at the wall, and it turns out to be something like, wow, that's beautiful, but it looked like you were just throwing paint at the wall. You were just slapping it on there. And it turns out to be this wonderful picture. That's humanity. That's
a fantastic analogy.
That's what's going on here. Is people are peopling, but God is still getting things done. I tell people all the time, I say, God is playing chess, or everybody else is playing checkers, and He is the grand master. He knows every move possible in this game. That's how far he is ahead of us. And so
sometimes we're not even on the board.
Yeah, exactly. He's won every game we could think of playing against him. He's like, don't even play that game. We don't even have to sit down. I'll tell you how I'm going to win every game. It's just amazing because, again, the humanity is on display. People being people, but God still being God. And if a person, could walk away from this with a lot of different ideas, but what if we really understood that God is trustworthy? That if He said something, that we can take it to the bank. That I am the Lord, I do not change. That God, even in the midst of all of this, still kept His word to a people that were rejecting Him and that were doing all kinds of stuff. When we think about the entirety of the Old Testament, God is faithful. It looks a lot cleaner in the New Testament, but the Old Testament highlights God's ability to be faithful and keep His word and hang on to the covenant that He made, so that it comes to pass ultimately for everyone. The promise He makes to Jacob, Isaac, and back all the way back to Abraham, all the way back to Adam, as you said earlier, that there is a promise that He's keeping all the way back, and then all the way up to our time. And so I think this is a place where we can stop rather than stumble and fumble along.
No, I definitely want to look, because there's so much here. If you really want to look at which kid comes from who, and really kind of and really kind of take, but we can take that through like the times of the kings, and we can kind of look and see like what happens to these different lines and see if there's a relation to whom they come from. I've never done that before, so that'll be interesting to see if there's correlation there.
And then we got to get to the wrestling with God, the meeting with Esau. There's some stuff that, again, there's no way that we have time to grab that at this point.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you guys want people to walk away from this conversation as far as our listeners?
So with this, I would challenge readers to take the time to thoughtfully walk through the text. Take the time to read the origins of these tribes, these people. Sit in the story and allow for the messiness, even though it is messy, even though it is a different time. And with Jacob, yeah, there's more. There's going to be another part next week. This might end up being a 4-part series on Jacob. I don't know, but there are tentpole moments that are easy to miss.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're messy, or because they're dealing with subject matter that almost feels a little inconsequential. But building your understanding here will help you further the intimate relationship that you have with the text going forward, and thus your intimate relationship with God. Like, yes, in the midst of everything that I just said, there is a line too far of making the Bible the fourth person in the Trinity and all that kind of stuff. But understanding what's happening in the long term helps you in an aspect to better understand God. Now, I say that in an aspect pregnant with all of the aspect, like everything that I have to say about relationship and supernatural and experiential and all of those kinds of things. I will never be the type of person that says that the only way that you can hear from God is through the Bible. No. If Andrew were here, I'd ask him to hit the buzzer. But that doesn't mean that we discredit the stories that we have. It doesn't mean that we don't take the time to really understand what's happening here, especially because the Bible does take the time to give us this whole unfolding soap opera and narrative.
Matt?
For me, it's really just God as a covenant keeper, right? Despite our mess and our foolishness and our bad intentions and all of those sorts of things, right? God made promises. And despite maybe the bad actors in Jacob and Laban and some of these other characters that God has to work with, he kept those promises and continues to keep his promises because God is the active mover in his covenants. They are things that he is going to do, whether we mess it up or not.
Right.
And so there is solace and there is hope in that for us broken people that we are, that he who begins a good work in you is faithful to complete it, no matter how much we try and get in God's way.
Yeah, man, I think you guys said it all. So I'm not going to be redundant, but yeah, that is a powerful reminder. Looking at this, just the portion of the patriarchs that we looked at, you see the one consistent stream is God's faithfulness, that he is faithful throughout all of the things that are going on. He is the consistent one, that this story is about him As much as it highlights these individuals, I think ultimately reading the Bible, I say to people all the time, is that we're not reading the Bible to know what it says. We're reading the Bible to know who God is. And so as we read, we're reading to really understand who he is. And that's what's going to end up guiding our interactions and helping us through life, is because we should see the thread that, man, God, you are consistent, you are faithful. You know, your desire to be in relationship with us is not thwarted by our antics, you know, and what we do as humanity, as we see throughout uh, so far what we've covered in the patriarchs. Um, Closing up, anything you want say before we close out, Joe?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, we're gonna say a quick word of prayer, and then we're gonna sign off. Thank you to you guys that were rolling with us for this 2 hour session. Um, Please chime in your comments, your questions, if you just want to say, "Whoa, wow, oh, that's interesting," just drop it in the chat so that we can interact with you guys. As you can see, streaming at the bottom, it says join the conversation. Jump on in at any time. I don't know if you guys are able to from where you are. Probably some of you are at work listening, or you're riding, and so don't be afraid to jump into the conversation. All of us would welcome your interaction. And so let's pray. So, Father, we just thank you for this time. We thank you for this opportunity to dive into your word, to interact, to fellowship with each other around the topic of the patriarchs, and specifically Jacob this week. And God, we are so thankful for your faithfulness, that you are a covenant keeping God, that you're just faithful throughout, even the messes that humanity can create. God, you ordain the ends and you allow us to fumble through the middle. And so, Lord, I just pray that we would seek your direction and your guidance, that we would be more aware that, God, you know the end at the beginning. So why don't we trust you and trust your plan, and not try to do it our own way and try to create our own path, but look at what you've already shown us, and follow to the best of our ability. We're not going to get everything right. And we know that you have contingencies for our mess ups, and you've already worked those into your plans. Nothing surprises you when we do certain things. It doesn't catch you off guard, because you are God and God alone. And so, Lord, I just thank you for these two gentlemen, and their heart and their desire for people to grow in the word and to hear your word, and to for people to build a deeper connection with this relationship with you as God, our creator and our father. And so, Lord, I just thank you and praise you for this. I pray, God, that this would bless those that would hear it maybe even later on, and that anything that we said that was inaccurate, Lord, correct us, show us where we need to go and how to correct it. Lord, we thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All righty.
All right, y'all. As we wrap up here, I want you guys to remember two very important things: that you are prayed for, and you are loved deeply. Go forward this week unafraid to engage with the text, ask the questions, wrestle with it, because God will meet you there.
All right. God bless you.